Hello class, today we're looking at the atomic bomb, but rather than focusing only on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we're going to look at what happened afterwards and how the nuclear age affected Australia. Australia played an important role in Britain's nuclear weapons testing program, including tests carried out here in South Australia. Before we begin, think about these questions. What have you heard about the atomic bomb? Which countries or places do you connect with atomic bombs? Did you know that nuclear weapons were tested in Australia? Where in Australia do you think the testing happened? So share one thing you already know with the person sitting next to you and write it down in your books. So in our image here, you see this is the mushroom cloud from a testing blast at Maralinga in South Australia. So we'll quickly go through the learning intentions and success criteria for today. So today we're learning how to identify the atomic age how the atomic age affected Australia, recognise where nuclear testing took place in Australia, understand some of the impacts of nuclear testing on people and the environment, and the success criteria. You will be able to name at least one place in Australia where nuclear testing occurred, describe one impact that nuclear testing had on Australia, and explain why Maralinga is significant in Australian history. So in this image you can see a concrete plinth that marks the ground zero at Emu Field, which is also in South Australia. The testing sites across Australia. So Britain wanted to develop its own nuclear weapons, and the Australian government agreed to allow Britain to test them in Australia. Between 1952 and 1963, nuclear weapons were tested at the Montebello Islands in Western Australia, and Emu Field and Maralinga in South Australia. Altogether, 12 major nuclear devices were detonated in Australia. This meant that Australia became directly involved in the development of nuclear weapons during the early Cold War. As you can see across here, we've got the locations of where all of these places are. So Maralinga and Emu Field are both in South Australia, and Montebello Islands is just off WA, the coast of WA. Alright, so Maralinga. So one of the most important Australian testing sites was Maralinga in South Australia. 7 major nuclear weapons were detonated during the 1950s. Smaller experiments involving radioactive materials also continued until 1963. The tests contaminated parts of the surrounding environment, and the effects of the testing continued long after the explosions had finished. This is particularly significant because these areas were also the traditional lands of Aboriginal communities. And here you can see some of the remnants at Maralinga that are just left lying around. How did nuclear testing affect Australians? So, the nuclear tests had several important effects on Australians. Aboriginal communities were particularly affected because testing occurred on or near their traditional lands, and radioactive material contaminated parts of the environment. Australian military personnel and civilians were also involved in the testing program. The environmental effects also continued for many years and eventually required further investigation and cleanup. Today, Maralinga is an important example of how international events such as the Cold War could have major consequences for people here in Australia. So we've got some effects that have been identified from those atomic testing. This image here is the aftermath of what happened in Maralinga. So it was a crater, and it's a bit of artwork done by Brown, and where they found 4 bodies located in the crater site. So we'll get you to have a think about these questions. So what do you think had the greatest impact from all the atomic testing? So was it a really big impact on the Aboriginal communities, on Australia's servicemen and civilians, the environmental damage, or Australia's involvement in nuclear weapons? So I'll get you to write that into your books.